serious? Have you ever watched as someone's world fell apart in a moment? What happened? I was at a friend's parents' house, sitting with her whole family, when friend's sister gets the call that the father of her newborn baby had been crushed to death in a work accident. It was excruciating, because there was nothing I could do for her except leave. She didn't know me, and I was extraneous to her situation. Unfortunately, I was 2 hours from home without transportation, and had to sit awkwardly in their living room until someone else could pick me up. Similar story for me. Kinda. I was spending the night at a friend's house. We were probably around 10 at the time, and early in the AM. A cop knocks on the door. His dad was driving home from a night shift and was in a fatal collision with a drunk driver. My grandparents were married for 60 years. I saw a lot of people break completely the day my grandfather passed away. My father and both of his brothers, but the most of them all was my grandmother. After a few hours spending time saying goodbye to him as we waited for the mortuary to take him to the funeral home, everyone was saying their final goodbyes to him on the stretcher. My grandma tends to be very calm, cool and collected about her feelings, and I had never seen her cry up until that day. She began to sob over him and say, "I'll see you soon, honey. I'll see you soon." I still get choked up remembering it. Yes. We had to tell my mother my father died. I will never forget that day. It was horrible on all of us, but her reaction was heartbreaking. They got married when they were still teenagers and had been together for 2 months shy of 30 years. It was an on-the-job accident and out of the blue. His workplace called my uncle, mother's brother, dad's best friend, first. And he called all of us. She was the last to find out, so we could all be there for her. At a small local store, a truck had reversed and hit a small 10-year-old boy who was scootering past. Ambulance and police everywhere. The boy's mom was right beside the boy and a huge crowd had gathered. The paramedic pronounced him dead after a few moments of struggling, and the mom screamed. A real low, deep pain scream that I can't forget. She got up and walked almost in slow motion, more of a limp, and headed directly towards me. Her eyes were just dead and she just walked aimlessly, and I swiftly left the scene. On the flip side, throughout this whole time, the driver of the work truck had locked himself in the car. He did not leave the car the whole time I was there. The mom tried to get into it at one point and the police were around it. The man was in it, just motionless and not responding to anything. I guess that's two worlds that fell apart in that moment. I was there when my friend got the news that there had been a shooting at a church a lot of his family went to. He got word it was happening, but only one person had been shot. While devastating, he had been told that no one he knew had been hurt. He then got word that the one person shot was his uncle. They got him to the hospital, but he didn't make it. Yes, a pain I know all too well. I am an engineering student and I have had the pleasure of meeting many engineering students. A friend of mine was taking some tough courses, differential equations, dynamics, mechanics and materials, structural analysis. He had been struggling throughout the semester. However, he started to turn it all around at the end. After finals week, he felt like he passed every single class. He was on top of the world. The grades came out and I will never forget his face when he looked at his results. It was a face of pure horror and sorrow. He failed every class. An entire semester wasted. He wouldn't talk to me. He did not say a word. He was just there motionlessly. I tried consoling him, but he just wouldn't respond. He got up and left. That was the last time I saw him. I did not hear from him after that. 2 months later, I find out that he died in a motorcycle accident after veering off the road. After talking to his parents, he was suffering from severe depression after that semester. To anyone still in school, failing a class is not the end of the world, it happens. If you ever feel depressed, make sure you get help. It's hard to fight it alone. I wish my friend knew this. Rest easy, Davis. Had to tell my brother that our dad died. Mom was in the hospital and she let me know there. On the way I was crying so hard. barely held it together when I knocked on his door. The casual "what is it?" greeted me. "Dad died." Oh. I closed the door, went into my room. A few hours later I heard him cry. Broke my heart. I was speaking privately in my office with one of my employees when a call came through on my office phone that there was an urgent call for the employee. I handed over my phone and managed to catch her as she crumpled moments later. Her dad, who'd been missing for 2 days, had just been found deceased. A co-worker of mine lost her family member in a natural disaster. I found out about it when I read an interview with her in a national newspaper. It was shocking. She hasn't been back to work since, and it has been almost a year. I wonder how she is doing. It happened to me. I was in my first assignment as a sales rep on an expo. I was totally freaking out because I was alone and trying to represent the brand and looking for partners. And then my sister called. My mom and her were leaving the hospital. Mom was diagnosed breast cancer. It was very aggressive and they had to do a mastectomy by the end of the month. Otherwise chances were very slim she would hold a year. That hit me like a ton of bricks. Next thing I remember is driving back to the hotel and being stopped by a policeman because I ignored a red light. I have no idea what he saw or how bad I looked, but he asked me some questions, understood what was happening and escorted me to the hotel. I barely remember the next couple days after all the phone calls with my mom and family. Of course, nowadays all of it seems silly. She got the surgery and took it like a champ. Did all the chemotherapy and survived. I married and got a daughter, and all these years have been a blessing to have her around. Life is full of surprises. My sister and I had to be the ones to let my mom know that her sister had died in a motorcycle accident. I never knew my aunt. We heard the news from my uncle and he didn't even have the decency to tell her himself. My mom is mild to moderately mentally disabled and she literally bawled like a small child. I was 13. It was horrific to witness my mom in such distress. That's horrible. I can't imagine having to do that as an adult. But as a child it's just cruelty. Co-worker seemed fine for the most part one day, if not a bit stressed. Eventually, toward the end of the day she gets a call and then sort of wanders into my supervisor's office looking to be half stressed, half out of it, and informs us that her cousin had just been shot by their husband. Apparently the cousin was going through a brutal divorce and her husband decided to do the worst thing. So he drove over to her home and shot her, before committing suicide himself. Even worse, her parents were visiting and witnessed the entire thing. So she got the news via phone and I wasn't sure what was holding her together as she was talking to us. But she went home soon after. I was shopping at my local supermarket one night. It was the freezer section and the only other person in the aisle was a man, probably 30-40, answering his phone. He immediately collapsed to the floor crying. I honestly don't know what happened, but he managed to pull himself up and rush out of the store. My sister died 3 years ago. When she was in her casket, I don't know how to write it, I watched my dad and other sister holding on it. Because my sister was inside, my sister's BF comes, picks her up, and keep her away from the casket for some time. So I went to pick up my dad, take him away so he wouldn't be so depressed. I have never had felt so adult since. My dad hugged me, and I realized how little and old he was, and skinny. I felt like an adult trying to take care of a child. When she was being taken away to be buried, my dad snaps and tries to hold to that wooden thing, like his life depends on it. Once again I have to hug him and listen to him saying, "My little daughter, my baby is dead." It was horrible and I never wished to someone to live a similar situation. My mother's face the moment she realized that we had taken her to a psychiatric clinic and was going to stay. I'm the same. Except we did this with my dad. He wasn't going to stay forever, just for a month or two. But he was crying and tugging on my clothes telling me to not let them take him. I've never seen my dad so vulnerable and sad before. It was horrible. He's better now and a ray of sunshine. I hope he stays like that. I will never forget the pain in my aunt when she was told that her daughter, 28 at the time, had passed away in her sleep in another province. She had a hole in her heart that took her. The air went cold. You could hear for miles in the moment it took for the news to sink in. And the wailing. It hurt so bad she literally was saying OWW while bawling. The way actors portray moments like these isn't even 1/10 close to the way she was. It felt like that hole in my cousin's heart was black hole swallowing up the both of them. I was close to my cousin. And every now and then my aunt will call me up and ask me to tell her stories of me and her daughter. Crying the whole time. God, I wish. I don't even have the right words. Worked as a nurse in the pediatric intensive care unit for years. If I never watch a father beg for his child live, or hand a mother her dying baby again, it will still be too soon. In the time I was there, I loved the job and thought it was great helping the sickest of sick kids get better, usually, and being able to provide support the family and still try to make a difference on the cases that didn't end as well. But now that I've changed jobs, I realize how traumatic it was. And how much it affects me even years later. I can still hear the voice of the dad pleading for his son to live from the last trauma I responded to before changing jobs. In the span of 20 minutes my best friend saw me get the news that my mum had terminal cancer. Then phoned my partner to give her the news. Only to be told that she wasn't actually on a work retreat thing. She was ducking her boss. Apparently I physically shrank. My mum died last week. And I'm not sure my head will ever be right. Betrayal is a third occur. Why did your ex-partner tell your friend that? At that specific moment? That's really bad timing. Or she's just a real itch. The latter. TBF, her wording was, let's just get this out of the way. I don't want to be with you anymore. On video call. Then she moved the camera a little. I could see she was shirtless in a hotel room and there was a man's jacket and tie in the background. I pieced it together in record time. Straight up asked her. And she admitted it. Even as a senior in high school, teachers were just people who existed in a school context but not outside of it. At the end of my senior year we were all seated in an examination hall ready to take an exam. The place was dead quiet as we waited. A little ways into the exam the air was ripped apart by the most horrific scream any of us had ever heard in our lives. It felt like it echoed off the walls and bounced back to pierce into our brains. When we looked back, one of our more hardest teachers had collapsed on the ground. None of us knew it at the time. But he apparently had a brother who was in and out of mental institutions quite frequently. That morning he got the call that he had committed suicide. It was painful to watch a man who so many people feared show so much emotional pain. Woman crying over a car seat while EMTs worked on the kid. Don't know how it turned out, but she was on the shoulder and I was in the left lane and I could hear her screaming. We'd had our first kid not too long before that. I got sort of drunk that night after the kid was asleep. Not so much fall apart. But it was really devastating to watch. I visited my sister for the first time in 5 years and she told me that her eldest daughter, 13, had been cutting herself and was suicidal. Usually there's nothing that can bring her down. But she just looked so defeated. I know that she has done everything she could for her kids, and I also know that my niece wouldn't have shown any indication if she could. That day, I messaged her and told her that if she ever needed a place to go, she could always come to me, and that anything she told me would be kept in absolute confidence unless I thought she or someone else was in danger. I wish I could help her. But I know that there is nothing else I can do for my sister or my niece. My mom, when my stepdad died, she came through the door and the only way I could describe how she sounded was a high-pitched squealing cry. I felt so bad. He was so good to her and she has been through a lot. Yeah. I was woken at about 7 AM while out of town by my then GF. Potential soon-to-be fiancée that her daughter was dead. The daughter that I had lived with and basically raised as my own for years. Complete incoherent screaming and wailing past that. And then the paramedic taking the phone from her and explaining that resuscitation was not going to happen. And how ducking soon could I be here? Cue the most tense, surreal, Erratic drive of my life, then doing what I could to comfort the person I loved the most in her darkest hour. Which wasn't much. Tore not only her life, but then my life and the life we had built apart. Irrevocably. It's been years. But it still rears its ugly head sometimes. Miss you. V. I watched my best friend get a phone call from her ex where he told her he had gotten in a car accident with her car. It was devastating because the relationship with him had started out so well. And within the past year he just started spiraling down. We've talked before about how much money, thousands of dollars, and time, countless hours, she'd spent trying to help him. Or get him professional help. That phone call was the moment she realized nothing she said or did was going to make him get better. He didn't want to get better. She's now working on cutting him out of her life completely, starting with replacing the windshield of her car, and it's exhausting to watch. I'm just trying to be here for her. My partner. The moment the nurses told us our baby boy no longer had a heartbeat just 4 weeks before his due date. I'll never forget the pain in his eyes and his screams. I had to follow that with a phone call to his mother. I can still hear her wailing cries and screams every night when I fall asleep. I was on a walk with my friend around her neighborhood when she saw her cat's corpse lying in someone's yard. The cat was always an outdoor cat. He'd always go out at night and come home in the morning, but that morning he didn't come back. Apparently, he got hit by a car when he was out and managed to crawl to the neighbor's yard before collapsing. My friend immediately broke down. She loves that cat and has said that he was her reason to continue living. I was with my family for all of us to get new passports. The line was pretty long and we had queue outside of the venue. A sidewalk pretty close to a street. 20 minutes in, a car suddenly stops and calls for a woman 4 to 5 people ahead of us. The driver yelling to her that her son was ran over by a car. The woman cried in hysterics and got into the car and drove away. Sobbing. I was young then. And only understood the whole situation some years later.